The Giant Trance is a very popular bike, and depending where you live, it might just be one of the most common bikes you see out on the trails. Now, in British Columbia, I don't see too many, but their presence in Australia and New Zealand is, well, absolutely giant. That's not to say though, the naming conventions of the Trance aren't a little bit confusing. This is the Trance X Advanced. There's also the Trance X Advanced SX, the Trance X and the Trance X SX. Now, if that all sounds a bit bewildering and you think that I've got some wrong, please don't at me, because quite frankly, I wouldn't be in the least bit surprised. The X denotes whether it is the radder, badder, bigger brother of the standard trail-ready Trance. Now, the standard Trance is a bike that we actually reviewed in a downcountry field test a little while ago, but don't ask about that. The SX denotes whether it is the more aggressive mixed-wheeled version, which has just a nibble more travel. First, let's look at this, the Trance X Advanced. So this full carbon 29er is more angular than Chris Hemsworth on a cut diet. And at the heart of the bike is that big rocker. And that's a good place to start when talking about the bike, because in it, it houses a flip chip that gives it 3 different geometry settings, which is also key in what enables this frame to go between full 29 to the SX version with the 27.5 out back. Now, I think the naming conventions, like I said, can get a little bit confusing. And I would say, instead of the SX, if you've got a bike called the Trance, there should be the Raven and the Misbehavin'. But hey, I don't work in marketing for a reason. With that geometry flip chip, it offers about 0.3 and 0.4 degrees of adjustment away from the central position. Now, it also means there's enough swing in the geometry to enable that smaller rear wheel in the back for the SX model. However, it is a bit more complicated than it would first appear. Because that shock in the SX has a 2.5mm longer stroke, it means they can't have that extra travel as well as the larger wheel. So the SX is a mixed wheeled setup only, whereas the standard Trance could have a smaller rear wheel put into the back and wouldn't have any clearance issues. As we move towards the front of the bike, first of all, you can see that in-frame storage, which Giant have been rolling out for a couple of years now, and it's great to see. As you get to the head tube, you'll see that this bike has reach adjustment built in with some chips that come with the bike. That means from the central position, you can go plus or minus 5mm. Then you go a bit higher and we get to the integrated bar and stem. Now, why do people and brands love these so much? Well, you can make them considerably lighter. This one around 40% lighter compared to a standard bar and stem. Why do people dislike them? Well, lack of adjustment, but that's something Giant have tried to address. They've done this in 2 ways. Firstly, there is a massive flip chip which sits inside that stem, if it is still a stem, that lets riders choose between 40, 45 or 50mm of stem length. Secondly, they've managed to use some clever spacers which sit underneath that integrated unit to give riders the choice between plus or minus 3 degrees of handlebar roll. Now, I'm something of a Luddite, so I'm using the standard headset spacers for the moment, but I'll experiment in time. So, big thumbs up to Giant for solving the problem of integrated handlebars. Even if one could argue it's a self-inflicted problem. It reminds me a bit of that Spider-Man meme where it's like, lack of adjustment, and then it points at you like, integrated handlebars, and it all gets a bit messy, but either way, they're giving riders adjustment with a cockpit setup that's going to be very light. The geometry is middle of the road modern, so it's a 480mm reach for a size large, with a head tube angle in the full 29 that's just south of 65 degrees in its middle position. When you put the smaller rear wheel in the back, naturally things get a bit slacker, and the head angle of the SX is around 63.5 degrees. With the smaller wheel, they can claim back some of that steepness by using those flip chips to stop things getting too slack. However, it's also going to affect the seat tube angle. Now, this is really interesting because one could argue that when we have bikes with slacker angles and more travel, we tend to do more winch up, bomb down style of riding. And on a shorter travel 29er trail bike, we do more undulating, fast-paced trails, which do better with a slacker seat tube angle. So in some ways, the 2 bikes are sort of inverse in that regard, but either way, it's a good solid foundation to get 2 wheel sizes out of 1 frame. It being a Giant, it of course uses their Maestro suspension system. Now this consists of a swing arm and two co-rotating links. The upper one drives the shock and the lower one pivots around the lower eyelet of that suspension unit. The Maestro system gives a feeling out on the trail of being very predictable, and you can see why in the charts, with anti-rise, anti-squat and leverage all being relatively consistent. It looks, in terms of the anti-squat, to be a bike that will be more about giving grip than all-out efficiency on smoother climbs. Anti-rise is relatively consistent, hovering around 50%, and progression follows in a progressive and linear fashion. As for the bikes, well, I've already talked myself into circles trying to differentiate between all the models, so please head to the Pinkbike homepage for a full breakdown of the models, plus a bit more technical insight. Thanks for watching, and please do subscribe because we really appreciate it. See you next time.